This is the Requiem Metal Podcast, episode 37, Katatonia Part 2. This episode brought to you by Seasons of Mist Records. Visit seasonsofmist.com and check out their web store where you can find new releases from Cynic, Septic Flesh, Outlaw Order, and Pentagram. You just heard For My Demons by Katatonia off their Tonight's Decision record. This is the Requiem Metal Podcast. I'm Mark Rudolph.
And I'm Jason Undy. And very appropriate song to kind of start things off with a kind of nice kind of build-up intro. Mm-hmm. And it really kind of goes into the quintessential riff, I would say, of the second Katatonia era that kind of, would you say was on that kind of a lot of delay? Or what was the effect that did?
I think it's delay or flange.
Yeah, it's sort of driving kind of like almost indie rock meets metal meets shoegazer kind of riff that really is going to define the sound of this part 2 of Katatonia. Mm-hmm. You know, now Tonight's Decision, which we're not going to talk too much about, but this song in particular, you know, in the record it's a little bit more, I guess, dynamic in terms of like the fullness of the sound. It's a little heavier than the one we're going to be kind of focusing on first, which is Discouraged Ones. But if you listened last week, then you heard obviously part 1 of Katatonia, where we kind of explored the heavier side, where they kind of came out of their black metal, death metal, doom metal roots kind of stuff. And obviously at the very end of that show, we sort of transitioned and showed you where, you know, Saw You Drown and the Saw You Drown EP, which came out late 97 ish. Yeah,
I think so.
Yeah, and I think so Saw You Drown EP came out. And what was, like, you know, for you guys, what was the reaction when you first heard the kind of new Jonas vocals after kind of Brave Murder Day and Sounds of Decay?
I don't really remember any kind of like hesitation. They just kind of, I jumped right on it. I've always been kind of willing to go wherever Katatonia went. I think they kind of have a good idea of who they are, and they're not really gonna, you know, turn that on, or, you know, do something that wouldn't really, you know, drive the band forward. And at that point, I think they really had to do something different, because you couldn't do, you know, Brave Murder Day Part 2. It's just not going to work.
Yeah, and I mean, they kind of refined it a little bit with the Sounds of Decay thing, but, you know, and it seems like, too, at this time, this was a really, like, weird period of time for extreme metal, especially European metal. I mean, you know, sort of the first wave of black metal, it kind of really played itself off. You know, Cradle of Filth was sort of
thing was like, okay, enough already.
Exactly. Demu and Cradle were kind of becoming household names. You know, I mean, Opeth were kind of doing their own thing, and I guess we should say that Opeth and Katatonia have always kind of been associated together, I think, because of not only just Michael singing with them, but also
they've been friends as well.
Yeah, big time friends and stuff, and
as well as Swino, you know, from Edge of Sanity's been really
those are like
both those bands.
And I feel like those 3 bands really don't fit in any scene. They're not part of Stockholm. They're not part of Gothenburg. They're just sort of like independently were able to do whatever they wanted to do. You know. You can almost kind of, as a side note, put Hypocrisy in there too, because I mean, Hypocrisy was really kind of a loose cannon as well, kind of doing whatever.
Yeah, I don't think they really did it as successful.
No, certainly not. I mean, they had like
they tried a lot, but
you know, they had a couple like Abducted and Final Chapter were pretty innovative, but then it was like. Then it just kind of turned to crap, really.
Yeah, I think he was better. Peter Tanger was more of a producer than he was a musician at that point.
Sure, and
or songwriter.
The thing too, like on these first couple Katatonia records we're going to hear tonight, like Discouraged Ones and Tonight's Decision, is that, you know, Jonas is being helped along the way by Michael's sort of vocal coaching as well. So again,
co-vocal producing the records.
Yeah, more of that connection. And then I think we forgot to mention as well, and it kind of dawns on me as we're kind of talking about the Opeth connection, that one of the main riffs of End Time from Brave Murder Day was actually a leftover riff from Morning Rise, Opeth's Morning Rise. So, you know, I think most people I know who are into Katatonia are into Opeth. I mean, it's they sort of kind of go hand in hand,
and they're really pretty different bands, really. I mean, when it comes down to it, it's not like an obvious connection that you, if you like one, you're gonna like the other.
But I feel like, you know, and that's why I feel like a lot of people like Katatonia also like Anathema or Bride or Paradise Lost, because
people kind of do their own thing.
Yeah, they're just sort of paving their own path, you know, and it doesn't matter that Opeth's doing like prog rock and Katatonia's doing sort of like doom gloom kind of indie metal.
And actually, around this time was when My Dying Bride did 34.7 Complete, which I think is a great record.
Sure.
And that's where they really kind of like turned away from, you know, the doom roots and really tried to do their own thing. But
Paradise Lost did 1 Second around this time as well. Anathema was putting out Judgment. I mean, this was really kind of
all these bands were really kind of like doing their own thing. They weren't really concerned with what the scene was doing. I don't think.
Well, and the scene was kind of dead. I mean, you know, even in, you know, at this point, even like the second wave of Swedish metal, the Gothenburg thing was kind of like
enough already.
Projector was coming out from Tranquility, which was kind of a failed experiment in a lot of regards.
Yeah.
In Flames was kind of In Flames was still like in Colony era, so they hadn't quite hit their creative wall. But it was a strange time in metal for sure. I mean, the late 90s, this is when like America had like the pop explosion of Britney Spears, NSYNC and all that. And I mean, it was just a really uncomfortable, we were just sort of joking about what's the future of music in the hopeful Obama years. We had all this depressing doom and gloom in the 2000s with the
come back to some Rat and Dawkins or something.
Yeah, exactly. We're gonna get like the high gloss kind of stuff again, maybe, or I don't know. And I feel like that was what the late 90s were. The economy was soaring, peacefulness, everything was good, and there was like it was really hard to like find a footing and creative music, and so you had to really almost force creativity, and that's what Katatonia does in this era. And Discouraged Ones is one that often gets sort of left behind. People talk about Brave Murder Day, and then they'll kind of jump to Last Fair Deal Gone Down or something like that. This is near and dear to both of us. I mean, this was sort of the first Katatonia record I got into that I kind of thought of Katatonia as like a total like band. Brave Murder Day was just something, again, like I said last podcast, that was just sort of put in my hands, and it was kind of weird. Yeah. And it didn't really fit into anything else I was listening to. Yeah. But this was like, oh, okay, they're a whole band. They've got a vision, and the cover with the angel, and I mean everything about it was really hip. Did you notice like any resistance in the metal world to what Katatonia was doing? Like, was there like a lot of backlash?
I don't remember a whole lot of coverage at all, to tell you the truth. Right. I mean,
because like Paradise Lost and Bride got so much backlash, and I just was curious if people kind of like were anti-Katatonia because of what they did here.
Not that I can really think of. They're kind of a polarizing band. I think you like them or you don't, no matter what era you're in.
And I think they didn't have maybe as established of a past. Like Paradise Lost put out like 4-5 straight consistently like doom records that were in the same vein.
They slowly upped the ante a little bit, but yeah.
And whereas Katatonia did like Dance, which was way different than Brave, which was way different than For Funeral. I mean, it was just like they're across the board. So I don't think people had expectations maybe for Katatonia, and so there was that freedom, to kind of create. So, but Discouraged Ones, how does this album kind of stand out like differently than say Tonight's Decision and Last Fair Deal Gone Down, which are more, I guess, bombastic and louder, and
I think this one, as far as like production goes, it's pretty raw, and Jonas's vocals, or Jonas, well either way, you know who we're talking about.
You can call him Jonas, I'll call him Jonas. One of us is right. So.
His vocals, they're kind of like in their infancy of like this new kind of clean singing, and I think the result of that, he does a lot of like interesting stuff. His voice breaks a lot. I mean, it's kind of like the whole
inappropriate for the opening track we're going to play, which is "I Break." But
it comes across not like it's a failed attempt at singing, but it emotionally encapsulates what he's talking about too. It like totally makes sense. It's like this guy in the pits of agony,
sure,
and singing his heart out, and really he does a lot of stuff with. I think he harmonizes his vocals a little bit, has backing tracks. And I think a lot of that, I think for that, this record's more dynamic than Tonight's Decision. I find, at least vocally and musically.
Yep. It's definitely more diverse. Tonight's Decision has like kind of one beat to it, and we'll talk
it kind of seems too long too, I think. But.
Yeah, and I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention the fact that this is when Katatonia has clearly gone, not just to, we mentioned The Cure and Sisters of Mercy last time, but they're clearly going into very definite indie rock territory here with the Red House Painters, Mark Kozelek vocal influence that Jonas
Jason Molina,
Jason Molina from Songs Ohio and Magnolia Electric Company. I almost wanted to call him Sugar Company. I don't know why. There's the My Bloody Valentine is very obviously there, and the kind of shimmering guitars and the wall of sound, the effects and the kind of delays that are being done. Slow Dive, another huge shoegazer band, which if you look at the back of the CD, Jonas is wearing a Slow Dive shirt. I mean, Jonas has cut his hair. I mean, it just really seems like he's sort of like shed metal on this record and in this era in a little bit, and he's discovering Will Oldham and Mark Kozelek and Nick Cave and all these sort of different vocal influences.
Dark vocal influences, yeah. He's not, going for the Brian Wilson kind of vocals or anything.
No,
it's stuff that kind of fits the same tonal track as they were on,
and it's kind of the same, it's the same kind of direction, the same path that Nick Holmes took, that Aaron took from Bride, that Vincent took. Yeah. I mean, they're all kind of going into this sort of we don't have to do doom metal with death vocals anymore. We can do it with just morose, saddened lyrics and saddened vocals. And I mean, in a way, it's more effective.
They don't really lose anything. And yet they're bringing in, a whole nother demographic of people that wouldn't give death metal vocals a chance. So.
I mean, to me, Discouraged Ones and Last Fair Deal Gone Down are just as doomy, if not more depressing, than Brave Murder Day and Dance of December Souls.
Oh, I would say so. It's more real life doom. It's not epic doom.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. It's sort of getting out of that fantasy element and really getting into some of
it's maturity,
different lyrical territory. And in particular, the song we open things up for, My Demons, features some of the best lyrics that I think Katatonia ever wrote, when he says, if you knew what I'd been through, you would never sleep at night if you knew what I've been through. As the way he says it, you just feel like
lyrics on Tonight's Decision are exceptional, even though the album itself's a little on the subpar side, I think, as far as their whole catalog goes. Throw it up next to most people or most other bands, and the album still shines.
Yeah, agreed. And we're going to talk about some lyrics when we come back of a song that we're going to kind of close this first setup with. But we're going to get to Discouraged Ones. We're going to hear a trio of songs. I Break, which kind of kicks the whole album off. And this song really reminds me, I was telling Mark of when I first had my construction job and was doing a lot of sweeping on the job site with this on headphones, and I don't know if it made me work harder or if it just made me think a lot more about life and stuff like that. But
it's one of the few bands in this kind of genre of music, or at least close to this genre of music, that talks about anything you can identify with, and not Satan or the fall of mankind or whatever else.
Yeah, and I always felt like
personal struggle.
It was very cathartic listening to Katatonia, because you felt kind of personalized, and I felt the same thing with Anathema, and maybe you felt the same thing with Paradise Lost sometimes.
Some degree, yeah.
But we're gonna listen to I Break, Cold Ways, and then we're gonna close things out with Last Resort.
I will find a way.
was Last Resort, Cold Ways, and I Break. Trio of tunes from Discouraged Ones from Katatonia's kind of second era here. And, one of the songs we didn't play that Katatonia always plays live, it seems like, is Dead House. Mm-hmm. And that's a really neat song if you get a chance to hear it. And if you've only heard the live versions a few times, you got to definitely check out the studio version because you really get to hear the middle section, which is where the whales are calling. It's creepy, it's cool, it's atmospheric, it's different,
You think like Star Trek The Voyage Home where they gotta help, it fits in perfectly. Mm-hmm. It doesn't seem like it's just this random sample kind of thing.
It's in a way, it fits as well as that sort of Shining sample fits in End Time, kind of that just uncomfortable.
It's just there to like texture the thing, not to necessarily say, hey, here's a whale sound, or like Nicholson talking.
Yeah, we just thought this would be cool to throw in. But lyrically, there was something Mark and I kind of wanted to mention about the last tune you just heard. There was a period of time where when we were doing Eclipse, we decided to unionize, and Chris will probably laugh about this as well. We were young, we were kind of, Chris was in Philadelphia, we were back here in Michigan trying to like kind of do things, and we were kind of just looking for some kind of, we wanted to see more eye to eye creatively, and so we had toyed with the idea of possibly kind of striking out on our own and doing our own magazine back when zines sold and actually had a
when they existed
pre-internet or like early internet phase, and we struggled for weeks and weeks and weeks for like trying to figure out what the hell we were going to call this thing. We had no like vision of like what we wanted to do in terms of interviews or like what albums we were going to review. We were just searching endlessly for a name. That seemed like it's like a band. You start a band and it didn't matter if you played good music, you just had to have a cool name first. And, we came up with Autumn's Ascension. It came from the lyric in Last Resort where he says shrouded in autumn's grave and ascension. And but before obviously we ever went that route, we had a little conference call with Chris and everything was good and we all hugged and kissed and made up. And I think actually because of that we put out some,
I think we did stronger stuff after that. It was a matter of us just kind of like coming to grips with what we wanted out of it and wanted to have more input. So
exactly. And it's one of those things where like,
and it wasn't like Chris was being a tyrant. It was just we never voiced our opinion.
I was gonna say we were being dudes, not saying anything for like too long, and then it like built up. We were really frustrated and
hitting
pissed
shoulders
off
and passing.
So it's one of those kind of funny memories. Every time I hear that song, I can't like escape that lyric. So but getting back to tonight's decision, which is where we're gonna go next, and you heard For My Demons earlier, but the record in particular, even though Skogsberg does the production again, I think, let me check. Sunlight Studios. So Skogsberg has been now consistently doing the Sounds of Decay EP. Mm-hmm. He's done Discouraged Ones, and now he's going to do Tonight's Decision. But this is, besides the production kind of consistency, it's a lot heavier. I feel like, Discouraged Ones, like a tune like Cold Ways, which we just heard, still this sort of like it's trapped between this very like kind of very quiet vibe and also some of those disharmonic kind of Brave Murder Day guitars and stuff, and it's got a couple of those like crunchy breakdowns that really is what makes more sparse, Tonight's Decision though. This was a record that came out at a cool time. This is when Still Life from Opeth came out. This is when I think Light at the End of the World came out from Bride, somewhere around this era. Yeah, it was like Peaceful was putting out, like Judgment from Anathema was coming out, so Peaceful was kind of like on a big run here for a while.
Well, this is their first Peaceful record.
That's right.
Discouraged was on Avant Garde.
Yep, and then Century Media put it out in the U.S., but. Yeah, and I think there's something to it because this is when they bring in Travis Smith for the first time, and he really kind of becomes the defining.
This was before he was much of a name either.
No, I think this and Still Life from Opeth were like really the first kind of big things that he did, and he's kind of been the visual artist ever since. And if you've seen a Katatonia record cover in the last few years,
I think one of his best is Last for Deal.
Oh, that's
the whole layout,
exquisite,
is fantastic.
It just looks like these kind of just photographs that he's put together, and
just distressed photographs of like empty cityscapes and
and I don't know, it's just if you need to go online and kind of check out his style, and he's even done some really cool like not just artsy fartsy kind of stuff, but on the most recent record he did a kind of photo layout that was very similar to Left Hand Path Entombed, with the standing in front of the giant cross and stuff. You know, and you even mentioned his hair kind of.
It's in the exact position as Nicky Anderson's was in the photo.
Yeah.
And it's pretty cool. And who's going to get that but people who have been listening to this stuff forever?
Sure. And, you know, as an artist, like, you were kind of inspired by some of his stuff in terms of what you did with some of the Eclipse covers, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, to some degree, especially his subject matter and the like distressed nature that he started to do later on. Because I was doing everything analog at that point, taking photos and, you know, compiling them in Photoshop, and I'd make a point to make dirty prints.
Yeah.
I mean, just to, you know, you look at the cover of Last Fair Deal, and the whole thing's distressed.
Sure. And there's one thing on tonight's decision I noticed was the noose. Yeah. The Shadow of the Noose, which was probably I think one of your cooler covers. I mean, it was so simple.
The guy hanging himself in the back. You just see the feet in the shadow of the implication.
You know, and it was you hanging yourself over a bathtub, kind of creating the shadows and stuff, you know. But anyways, I just wanted to point that out because I think, again, when you're talking about the Katatonia aesthetic, you got to really like look at the cover and all the things that they put into it at this point. But, you know, tonight's decision has some of the strongest, I think, tracks. But as a whole, it kind of gets a little bit boring and tedious at times. I think, yeah. And this in particular was kind of interesting as well because they did a cover here of Jeff Buckley's Nightmares by the Sea.
This has been a band that's consistently kind of like made me explore new things as well. I remember listening to this on a trip out to Arizona and ended up picking the Mystery White Boy Jeff Buckley like double disc.
It wasn't Mystery White Boy. It was For My Sweetheart or The Drunk. Because Mystery White Boy Sketches for My Sweetheart. Right. The Mystery White Boy is the
had basically a lot of his stuff that would have been on his second album if he wouldn't have passed away.
Yeah, hadn't have drowned. So, and again, I agree with you. You know, I think when Mark and I first started hanging out, I was probably a little bit more kind of been in some of the indie stuff because Mark had been, you know, just deeply entrenched in the metal for so long, and so when he and I were both kind of exploring, you know, what Jonas was into, it was sort of strange because I had some of this stuff, like I had Slint, you know, and things like that, but like I had never made the association of Katatonia and Slint until, you know, we started kind of brainstorming about this and like, well, what are they listening to? Oh, really? This? You know, Will Oldham? Oh, let's check out Will Oldham, you know?
Yeah.
It kind of opened a lot of doorways for us. And I think we kind of mentioned that in the last podcast about how Jonas was maybe going through the identity crisis at the same time that we were in terms of, man, metal's kind of boring in 90, 98, 99, you know, like, what's the future of metal going to be? And so it really opened up some doorways for us. And I think that's why I associate myself so personally with Katatonia, and I think they are cut above the rest, you know. And we'll get into that a lot more with Last Fair because that's probably the ultimate example of that, I think. So, but we do want to get into a couple tunes off this because, you know, I think we do start to see some more dynamic stuff happening musically, especially on the second song you're going to hear, A Darkness Coming. Just a really nice kind of build, and you even mentioned like triumphant almost.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. I mean, the guitar lines are almost the lead that comes in later on. Is almost like this guy's like overcome some horrible obstacle.
Yeah.
Like, well, screw it. I'm gonna, you know.
Or it's just sort of the sort of acceptance of fate. You know, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that on some level. You know, to accept that, you know, like whatever your life or whatever your purpose is sort of coming to an end, as long as you're kind of like comfortable with that. I guess so. But, you know, so they're getting into pretty heavy subject matter here. But we're going to hear I Am Nothing and Darkness Coming from tonight's decision. Then we're going to close things out with the first of several tracks from Last Fair Deal Gone Down. That will be The Future of Speech.
I remember one of my friends tell
You just heard The Future of Speech, A Darkness Coming, and I Am Nothing, off the Tonight's Decision record, Katatonia.
And not to get too highfalutin here, but I think one of the things about Last Fair Deal Gone Down, which came out in 2001, again, it's on Peaceville, and again, Thomas Skaggsberg. I think it's the last record they do with Skaggsberg in the Sunlight Studios, which, you know, for those of you who are kind of keeping track at home, you know, Sunlight Studios was kind of what helped create the Swedish death metal sound.
Tomb Left Hand Path, you know, Dismember Like an Ever Flowing Stream, countless others.
Yeah, I mean, even some of the At the Gate stuff, I think, came out of Sunlight Studios, if I'm not mistaken. Was it Terminal? I don't think...
Possibly.
Because it was Frederick... Frederick did Slaughter of the Soul.
What the hell's that guy's name?
It's...
I want to say Frederick Norman, but it's not.
Yeah, it's escaping me. I don't know. But the one thing, if you're hearing this record for the first time, or again you're kind of noticing a distinct like musical change, you know, Katatonia has just been this 3-piece for the now, going back to Brave Murder Day for the most part, of you know, Jonas and Anders and you know, Frederick Norman, and Dan Swano guest drummed on Tonight's Decision. Well, there's a huge jump in musicality that occurs between Tonight's Decision and Last Fair Deal Gone Down, because they bring in 2 permanent members of the band finally to round out Katatonia as like a permanent sort of 5-piece, ready to tour kind of act.
Well, I think he's probably one of the strongest musicians, the drummer out of the group. I mean, what he brings to this, they're able to cut back on guitars and not be so dense, and he could carry an entire song by himself almost. Yeah,
and you'll hear that in a second when we bounce Tear Gas and Sweet Nurse out at you. I mean, both songs just like, I mean, he just drives them, you know, in a way that
he's almost got a nu metal aesthetic to his style, but not.
Yeah, there's almost like a System of a Down meets kind of Tool, you know, kind of punch to what they're doing. You know,
he's got a little bit of hardcore
kind of coming through
going on.
And Deftones definitely had that same sort of like punch to them, and I think Deftones is a good kind of touchstone for where Katatonia is at in their careers at this point. And then Frederick's brother comes in, Matthias, as the permanent bass player, and he does some really cool stuff. But the tune you just heard, Future of Speech, has some like awesome lyrics that, like I was telling Mark, I can totally identify with as a just sort of as where I was in life at this point, when it says, my prospects have become less promising. I find it hard to believe in anything. Seems I lost my world, so I lost my faith, and I can't go back to where I've been. I mean, it's just, you know, this is a time where I was sort of traveling in Europe and stuff like that. The biggest thing is when you hear, when I read lyrics like that, and like this song, you know, like my youth is stolen, it's just so strange, because this is like when I first went to Europe and kind of went on my own, like, I don't know, personal quest of understanding myself as an American abroad, you know, and looking back across the pond. You know, it was like a weird experience. I was reading like Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States of America, and like it's really just this nitty gritty, just the horrible like underbelly of like American history and stuff.
What our ideals are based on.
Yeah, and I mean, just blood. The truth, you know, like the genocide of Columbia. I mean, just all this stuff. And like, you know, I was seeing myself in a larger context of the world for the first time. And it's true, like, you can't come back. You're never the same. Like, you just won't be. And then this is also the you know, 2001. This is also, you know, not to get into like crazy stuff, but you know, this is like 9/11, but it's also like when Bush came in and kind of just really destroyed America with like fear and, you know, emptiness and stuff.
8 years of fear-mongering.
Yeah, and it was like Katatonia like represented this almost in a way, like they were like speaking to us about just like the depression of life. And at the time, you know, maybe I didn't know it, but I think, you know, you and I
it's like that youth lost kind of thing, where like, you know, you're hitting adulthood and you don't know what the hell to do, and you're getting all these conflicting opinions and conflicting ideas coming at you, and you got to kind of make sense of the whole thing.
Well, and we were both in college at the time that all this stuff was kind of going on, and this record came out, and we were kind of at the peak of our involvement with, you know, Eclipse and journalism and things like that. Because by the time Viva Emptiness comes out, the next record, we were done with Eclipse for the most part. Because
we were.
I had finished student teaching. I was ready to move downstate and kind of do my thing, you know, and you know, whatever. But this record, when it came out at this particular time, was just so important.
Yeah.
And this new dynamic musicianship that was there with the driving drums, I think Jonas really tapped into like his darkest moments,
and his like his first coming up with like melody lines for his vocals. Like, wow.
Yeah, and there's a song that we're gonna kind of bust into after we open things with Tear Gas, and it's Sweet Nurse. And I distinctly remember driving up to Traverse City I was volunteering at the Special Olympics, and I was telling Mark, I think I counted 18 times in a row. I just kept going back. There was something about the urgency of like the chorus and how it just soared over everything. I mean, it was like Jonas like to the next level, you know, like Michael had taught him all these tricks. He had really found his confidence, found his wings after these kind of two hesitant vocal performances on Discouraged Ones and Tonight's Decision, and like
everybody is firing on all cylinders on this record. I mean, if you could only pick up one Katatonia record and you don't have any, I'd tell people to pick this up.
I think this one, you know, even though Brave Murder Day will kind of get the attention because it's this like, I don't want to say a flash in a pan, but it's this like moment
in time.
Yeah, no one had ever done a record like that. You know, I wouldn't say that no one had ever done a record.
Went out and did something very similar to that. Yeah,
exactly. But I don't know. I think, you know, we were talking about if Decibel ever did a second Hall of Fame, you know, this would be it. You know, if they ever awarded a band a second Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
You know? But I don't know, just a lot of personal lyrics on this record. I think Jonas was at a soul-searching point of his time. And I remember doing the interview with him and like really kind of talking to him about Nick Drake and stuff like that, and how like Nick Drake had lyrics very similar to this.
Wasn't that right at when the Pink Moon was on the Volkswagen commercials too?
Yeah, so and it's like when Nick Drake kind of got like re-entered into the, you know, public consciousness and stuff. And I don't know, it was what it was because of the fact that we were almost worried for Jonas's life. Like, is this guy on the edge? Is he teetering?
Yeah. He's kind of went, you know, figured things out since then. But
yeah, well, and I remember in the interview he responded back like, "Dude, you guys are crazy. Like, Nick Drake killed himself. I'm not, you know, like I'm just writing, you know, songs and stuff." But
lyrically, yeah, he does. I think he owes a lot to, or he's in the same school as Buckley and Drake. And, a lot of those guys
really tapping into it. And before we forget, the title comes from an old Robert Johnson's blues tune. So cool title, fantastic record, and we're gonna hear a trio of songs from this. We're gonna hear Tear Gas, which is the first single, and I remember you said you got
this is the first MP3 like promo thing I think I ever got. I listened to it the entire day at work.
I remember you bringing it over.
Because it was so long since
since
the last Katatonia record. I was just like so stoked to hear this thing.
Yeah, and I think a lot had changed for us between '99 and 2001. I think it was just the opening up of so much, you know, so many more diverse elements. And this was like it. It was like, what if Jeff Buckley, Slow Dive, My Bloody Valentine, and Deftones like made a, you know, Swedish metal record? Well, here we go.
There we go.
You know. So, anyways, we're gonna hear Tear Gas, Sweet Nurse, Don't Tell a Soul, and then we're gonna close things out with something from Viva Emptiness, Evidence.
broken glass. Is this the time I should be on my knees? Is this your way of telling another has been found? Now I know it's tear gas in my eyes. What is it in my eyes? A piece of broken glass. Is this the time I should be on my knees? Is this your way of telling another has been found? Now I know it's tear gas in my eyes. Sweetener, pull the curtain aside for a while, so that I can for once have the sun in my eye. You smile and say it's a fine day. Oh my sweetener, pull the curtain aside for a while. Then like a ghost at night, you crawl around all dressed in white, talking to me. And so I had to drink the water with your poison still. No more will. Oh my sweeteners, seems you have so little time that you rather put me to sleep than sit by my side. Then like a ghost at night, you crawl around all dressed in white, talking to me. And so I had to drink the water with your poison still. For no check the time. 1 minute, no collapse. If you only knew what I would do for you. 1:30 breathing laps. We're going in. My voice is thin when I tell you to remember that no one will find you. A promise from the heart. If we part, my pulse will guide you through. Be still for a moment. Everything depends upon you. You will die, I will die too. Once we were heroes, but everything has changed since then. Now they recognize you too. I stay too long, something's wrong. You walk out of the picture. I hold my breath and check the time. 1:30, I collapse. We went in, my voice was thin when I told you to remember that no one will find you. A promise from the heart. If we part, my pulse will guide you through. Be still for a moment. Everything depends upon you. You die, I will die too. Once we were heroes, but everything has changed since then. Now they recognize you too.
Was Evidence, Don't Tell a Soul, Sweet Nurse, and Tear Gas. And Evidence takes us into our second to last Katatonia record, Viva Emptiness. And, this is in terms of lyrically, they kind of go kind of far away from Last Fair.
It's a little more abstract. It's not as personal as Last Fair Deal, I don't think.
Yeah, and we were trying to figure out like what the heck the lyrics to Evidence were talking about. The next song we're going to play,
SAT
Complicity.
test, I have no idea.
Yeah, exactly. To take the test, But the one thing you're hearing a lot more of musically on this record is Tool.
Yeah.
Perfect Circle.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a definite interest in all things
that
major.
kind of like off-time angular guitar kind of stuff.
Yeah, very angular. And I don't know, again, if it's just where they were at musically, if they were just listening to a lot of Tool, a lot of Deftones, this sort of American
I remember at the time, I remember Tool was on, at least on Jonas's playlist on his, they used to do like a monthly playlist on their website, which, I was a fanboy, so I,
Sure.
followed fairly religiously to see like what other, since they kind of turned me on to a lot of this other stuff.
Well, I remember that Metal Fest that we talked about in the last podcast when we met Frederick for the first time. He had a Perfect Circle shirt on
Yep.
for that first record, and I was kind of like, weird.
Makes sense.
And it kind of made sense a little bit. But those are the things that sort of strike out at me with Viva Emptiness. This one, as I was sort of reading and researching this a little bit just to see what other people kind of thought, this one seems to take the most slag from fans. Yeah, that was the vibe I was getting through Amazon and through some of these other
because it has
places.
like more of a new metal vibe.
Maybe, I don't know. I think there's just the Devotional Last Fair deal was so big. I mean, Viva Emptiness was going to be a letdown either way in some capacity. Yeah. But it's still a great record. It's got some really fantastic, very strong songs on it. Mm-hmm. They bring back some of the heaviness too. A song we're not going to hear, like "Ghosts of the Sun." Daniel, the drummer, is doing some screams and stuff. And there's a lot of these that are make great singles, like "Criminals" and "Ghosts of the Sun." They always play live. Mm-hmm. It's got Inside the City of Glass is an instrumental they end the record with, which is almost like harkening back to Brave Murder Day.
It almost seemed to me like there's, this is the last you're ever going to hear this riff again.
Yeah, it's sort of what Sentence did on their last record when they played that like 50-second song that was like from here. You know, I mean, it was kind of like, okay, here.
Well, we got a new producer on this record too.
Yeah, and we have no idea where this guy's from.
I think he's fairly well known in more like mainstream with more mainstream artists, but
yeah, I mean, it says it's produced by Nystrom and Renske, but he did some of the engineering, Ian Agate, but I don't know much about him. The color scheme's really interesting. It's all done in
it's all monochromatic, black and white.
Mm-hmm. A cool layout for sure.
Mm-hmm.
It's got some kind of interesting things going on for it, but one of the tunes I really like off this as well that it wouldn't feel appropriate to play because it's just so one-off is the Omerta song on here. I think it's kind of interesting. It's
almost a traditional sounding.
Yeah, it's like a folk
Irish song, yeah.
But it's actually a suicide note, which I mean it goes right. It kind of ends really uncomfortably because I think he ends uncomfortably.
Yeah.
So. But the tune we're going to kind of get into next is Complicity, and this in particular has this really big angular Tool riff breakdown at the 2:30 mark, and this was, out of all the tracks that Mark and I were trying to agree on, this was the one that we said absolutely had to be played from this record. We flirted with 1 Year From Now and Walking by the Wire and what's the Will I Ride. I mean, those were all songs we kind of wanted to play, but we had to kind of cut things short and get to just 2 songs from this record just for time constraints. But Complicity is a great song. If you're a Tool fan, you've never really kind of gotten into Katatonia, this might be the hook for you. So
it's not Tool verbatim, but it totally captures what they get out of a breakdown.
Oh yeah, for sure. And from here, we're going to hear one more Viva Emptiness song, and then we're going to get into the last record that they put out, which is The Great Cold Distance. And you'll hear a pair of songs here in particular, and both are kind of doing some of these more angular, kind of
a lot more sparse, compositions here too. They're relying more on drumming, vocals, guitar, alto work, kind of in unison, and not have such a thick production kind of thing.
Sure, and I think that's something to really kind of pick up on and kind of listen to here as you're kind of pulling this together. So we're going to hear Complicity, and then a pair of tunes from their most recent record put out in 2006, Great Cold Distance. You're going to hear July and In the White. So enjoy.
I speak the circuit, embodiment of what I've done. I waver from this circle, a second path and then I found he who walks behind me. He once saw the morning sun. He once saw the morning sun. cry. Truth comes down, strikes me in the eye. Not so far from a try. This is not our last goodbye. So I had a green light. I was lost in city lights. Not so far from a try. This is not our last goodbye.
Heard In the White, July, and Complicity. And our thoughts on Great Cold Distance as we sort of close the show out here and close part 2 of Katatonia is that it's got some really interesting moments. In particular, I think on those last 2 songs are just some really more progressive, innovative sort of songs. But a lot of the record sort of seems tired in some ways. In terms of the musicality, I think lyrically it's probably better than Viva Emptiness, but musically it's just sort of, it's the same kind of like crunchy, Katatonia riffs I've heard for 3 or 4 records.
It's Viva Emptiness Part 2, basically, but not as dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds me of, just the kind of feeling you get out of Tonight's Decision. It's got some great riffs, great songs, but as a whole, it's kind of falls flat.
And the song we just heard, In the White, I really hope they kind of pursue that kind of style a little bit more and maybe open up their sound and maybe get more melodic. I mean, you said either they got to get really heavy again, like what Paradise Lost kind of did, or they got to just totally kind of go off the deep end, like Anathema or something.
Or even like what the most recent Enslaved record, Vertebrae, what they've done is just
kind of minimalize it.
Yeah, the first time you hear it, you're like, they're not doing anything. But then, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times listening to the thing, wow, that's unbelievable.
And I think you hear elements of what they could possibly do in July and In the White. And In the White, I just wanted to mention, is kind of like the Katatonia love song almost. It's like their dark romantic tune or something. But, you know, we're going to close things out with the song that closes this album out. And I think, you know, it's called Journey Through Pressure. And it kind of, I don't know, I feel like it's kind of closing the chapter on Katatonia as kind of this second era. And so maybe many years from now, if you and I are still, if podcasting is still the way to go, maybe we'll have to do a Katatonia Part 3 about the kind of next era that they go into. But I don't know. So the future looks interesting for Katatonia. We'll see what they can do. They
haven't given us a stinker yet. They've given us, like, maybe we should have, you know, pushed us a little bit more, but I think they've
never
got a good head on their shoulders
liked
about this.
Katatonia record, you know, to this day. So we hope you enjoyed Katatonia Part 2, and if you have any comments, please throw us an email at requiempodcast@gmail.com.
Subscribe through iTunes, or give us a plug on your blog if you like it.
Heck yeah,
that'd be great.
Link to us or something. So enjoy Journey Through Pressure. I'm Jason.
And I'm Mark.
Try